What a game.
Unless you sacrifice the queen with queen c3 in this position. But I don't think Magnus feels the need to do something drastic like this. He does.
He
Wow.
does it!
Wow.
Did Magnus Carlsen forget the starting position of the chess pieces? Of course not. Magnus and his opponent, Hungarian Grandmaster Richard Rappert, are playing freestyle chess when the pieces are randomly placed for the starting position. This was an absolutely crazy game you don't want to miss. f4. This is actually the best move in this particular starting position, opening the diagonals for the bishop and the queen. d5 for Magnus. Rappert plays g4, opening the diagonal for the light square bishop. g5. Only in freestyle chess, the move g5 on the second move could be considered a good move. f5 for white, gaining space. d4, that's actually a very nice move, gaining space and blocking, limiting white's ability to develop their pieces. They have to play knight a3 to develop the knight through an edge of the board. Bishop c6 offering the exchange of the bishops. Bishop g3 developing the dark square bishop for Rapport. Knight goes to d7 and knight jumps to a very nice square on c4. Magnus doesn't want that knight to stay there for long and immediately challenges that knight with knight b6, but knight a5. And actually the knight looks pretty good on the square a5. Exchange of the bishops on h1, and after queen takes h1, white has immediate threats of taking the pawn on b7. Most of the chess players, I would say, on around 2000, 2200 level would immediately play c6 here, blocking this diagonal. But this is Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, the best player in the world. He plays rook d5. What a move. He challenges the knight on a5, blocks the diagonal for the queen at the same time, and the knight has to retreat. Knight b3. a5, another aggressive move by black, and the idea is to play a4 next. Therefore, Rappert plays a4 himself. Knight develops to a6. e4, great move by Rappert. And now if en passant takes on e3, the knight gets into the game with the tempo attacking the rook. So it's not a good idea to take en passant here. Has to retreat with the rook to d8, d3, knight b4. Very nice bishop on g3, by the way, surrounded by the pawns that are on light squares. This is a dark square bishop. Very nice diagonal. Knight d2, queen e8, challenging, attacking the pawn on a4 with the knight and the queen. White do not pay any attention to that and play castle. And this is the way castle is made in freestyle chess. If you've never seen this before, it looks pretty beautiful. Look at this again. Beautiful. So castle for white, knight takes a4, sacrificing the pawn for Rappert. He plays knight c4. And now, if black takes the pawn on c2, that would be a mistake, because after rook c1, there would be an open file c, and the pawn on c7 will fall eventually, and black's position is pretty much lost. Magnus doesn't take the pawn on c2, he plays queen b5, and after queen g2, white actually protects the pawn on c2. Knight takes d3, sacrificing the knight for Magnus, just for one move though. After c takes d3, queen takes b3, the piece is taken back. Rook c1. That looks pretty dangerous for black already. Kind of x-raying the pawn on c7 with the rook. The supporting piece is the bishop. So black have to be really careful here. Knight c5 is a strong move, protecting this file. Knight d2. And queen is under attack. Now Magnus makes a mistake here. He plays queen b5 and runs into a very nice shot b4. b4, and you cannot take the pawn with the pawn because the rook on a8 would be hanging. And Also, you cannot really do much except for queen takes b4, and after rook b1, white has a very dangerous attack with files b and c belonging to the rooks. Queen has to go away, goes to a3. Important to notice that the queen still has to protect the knight on c5. Knight, rook a1, queen b4. They repeated the moves a couple of times, and now knight b3. And knight b3 actually attacks the knight on c5. Cannot take the knight on b3 because after rook c7 the game would be lost. Black has a move though to protect themselves with knight a6. Not only retrieving the knight, but also the knight now protects the pawn on c7. White continue their attack with e5, opening the diagonal for the queen, and now the rook from b1 is also staring at the pawn on b7. Looks dangerous for Magnus again, and he plays rook e7, preemptively protecting the pawn on b7. Rook a7 is better than rook b8 because rook b8, after rook b8, the king is really smothered here by its own rooks. So rook a7, good move. Queen d2. Queen d2 attacks two pawns at the same time on a5 and g5. Cannot protect both, so a4. This is actually a blunder according to the engine, and the reason this is a blunder because Robert had a very nice tactics that he didn't see. Knight takes d4. Knight takes d4, and you're asking why this is good. Why is this good? Because simply rook takes d4. Believe it or not, after rook c3, black's queen on a3 doesn't have any moves. Every square is protected by white pieces, so black would lose a queen here. Roper didn't see that opportunity. He played queen a5, which also makes ton of sense, because again, the pawn on c7 is looking weak, is not under attack right now, but could be in the very near future, and therefore e6 is a very smart and logical move for Magnus Carlsen. He blocks the pawn on e5. The pawn on e5 has no moves, and therefore the bishop on g3 is blocked from the action also. Rook takes c7, check. Rapport sacrifices the rook on c7 for one move. Knight takes c7, he takes back the rook on a7. The knight on b3 cannot be taken by the pawn because the queen on a7 would be lost. Queen a2 now looks dangerous for white. Both pieces are under attack. If rook goes away, then the queen would simply take the knight. Robert plays rook c1, sacrifices the knight on b3. Queen takes b3. What a game we're having here. This is absolutely crazy chess. And actually, both players are playing with a very high accuracy in this crazy position. So rook c1, queen takes b3, we have a position where black, Magnus Carlsen, has an extra piece, an extra knight, and 6 points versus 4, so totally material advantage in his favor, but white has a move, queen c5, and now it turns out that black has only one move to protect themselves from a checkmate on c7, and that move is rook d7. Queen f8 check, rook has to go back to d8 to protect the king, queen goes back to c5, and here most of the players would simply repeat the moves with rook d7, queen f8 check, rook e8, queen c5. That would be logical, and most players would do that, but most players are not Magnus Carlsen. He is in a league of his own, and he plays an absolutely epic move here, queen c3. Queen c3, who would have thought that this move is even possible? So this is sacrificing the queen And, in most cases, when in a game of grandmasters, there is this queen sacrifice, usually it leads to either a checkmate, forced checkmate, or forced combination in 2-3 moves. Basically, you can see why the queen was sacrificed. Not the case here. After rook takes c3, pawn takes c3, queen takes c3, there is nothing going on immediately here. The queen, the extra queen, is for the rook, the knight, and the pawn. So if we go by pawns, queen is a value of 9 pawns, rook 5, knight 3, and pawn 1. So it's 9-9. So it's kind of equal if we just look at the material. Magnus Carlsen is trying to win this game with the passing pawn a4. That pawn is most important in this position. The problem for black here is this bishop on h8 is totally out of the game. So let's see what happens next. Bishop g7 makes sense to get the bishop into the game. Bishop f2, rook d5, challenging the pawn on e5 with the bishop and the rook, and queen a3. Magnus realizes here that the pawn on a4 is more important than the pawn on e5, so he protects the pawn on a4 with b5, and Rapport protects the pawn on e5 with d4. Rook goes back to d8, queen c1, attacking the pawn on g5. Magnus sacrifices that pawn. King b7, Rapport takes the pawn on g5, and here comes another absolutely out of nowhere shocking move by Magnus, a3. a3 is a shocking move because the bishop on g7 is under attack. The rook on d8 is under attack. He doesn't care, he plays a3. What happens? Queen takes d8, and after a2, turns out that white cannot stop black from promoting their pawn a and becoming a queen. Remember I told you like 10 moves ago that the pawn on a4 is the most important pawn for Magnus, and that's why. King g2, queen d7. So black is playing with an extra piece actually. But after after bishop h6, queen takes h7, now white has 2 extra pawns for a knight. So not so easy for black to convert this position. Queen c1 protects the bishop on h6, d5, and white are trying to create their own passing pawn. E takes d5, e6, using the pin. The knight cannot take on e6 because it's pinned to the king. And the pawn is 2 squares away from promotion. Black have to be careful. Queen f4, e7. Next move is the queen, and again the knight cannot take it because it's pinned. But Magnus exchanges the queens with queen e4 check. Queen e4 check, and white has to take on e4, exchange of the queens, h4. And now white have 2 connected passing pawns, g and h. And it looks dangerous, and it looks like it would be enough to draw this position at least. But again, Magnus is playing with black pieces, and he is the king of endgames. He knows exactly what to do. Bishop g7, g5, still looking dangerous. King goes to the middle of the board, h5, looking even more dangerous for black. King d7, h6, h6, bishop moves to c3, g6 doesn't work right now because king would take on e7, and let's say g7, king f7, and black is on time to prevent white from promotion the pawn g. Therefore, Rapport plays bishop c5, protecting the pawn on e7, knight e6, g6, very nice move. Cannot take the bishop on c5 because white will simply win with the move g7 and promote the pawn on g8 with the next move. Magnus, therefore, plays knight f4 check, king f2, knight takes g6, king e3, king e3, b4, king takes e4, b3, and now black is hoping for the pawn b to get to move 2 more squares and become a queen again. King d3, b2 doesn't work because king c2, and the promotion pawn would be covered, and that's a draw. Bishop goes to h8, king d2, and knight takes e7. Knight takes e7. According to the engines, this position is easily winnable for black. But let's take a look if it's so easy. King c1, and here Magnus all of a sudden makes a blunder. Knight d5 is a blunder, is a mistake, and it's a draw. It's a draw if Rappert finds the move bishop f8. Bishop f8 with the idea to play bishop g7 next. He didn't find it. He played bishop a3, and black is winning again. Knight f4, king b1, knight d3, h7, and the black's king is joining the action with king e6, and now bishop e7. In a totally losing position, Rappert plays a desperation move, and now if black is not careful and they take the bishop on e7 with the king, the game ends in a draw because the white king does not have any moves and not under attack, and the pawn does not have any moves, and that's a stalemate. So black have to be careful. The Magnus obviously doesn't take the bishop. He plays king f7, and the idea is just to get to the pawn h7 and capture it. Bishop d8, king g6, bishop a5, king takes h7. And here comes bishop c3. Another desperation move from Rappert. Give him credit, by the way. He is using every opportunity to draw this game. And again, if bishop takes c3, the game ends in a draw. White king doesn't have any moves, and it's a stalemate. But Magnus Carlsen plays the last move of the game, bishop g7. Bishop g7, and Rappert resigned. And if you're wondering what happens if white continues to play, like, let's say, bishop d4, asking black to take the bishop, and it would be again a stalemate. So how do you win this position for black? You win this position for black playing very slowly. King g6, bishop c3, you don't take the bishop, you move the bishop 1 square diagonally. Bishop f6, bishop d4, you don't take it. King f5, you don't take it. Bishop e5, slowly, slowly. Bishop d4, king e4. King e4, bishop c3, you don't take it again. You play bishop d4, and now if you exchange the bishops, then the king has a move, so therefore it's lost. And if the bishop moves to a5, you go knight b2, for example, bishop b6, another attempt for a draw in this position. Bishop takes b6, king takes b2, and the next move, king takes b3, and the bishop alone cannot checkmate the king. So there are a lot of mines still in this position, but again, after knight c4, black will eventually win this position. They just need to make sure there would be no stalemate. Absolutely beautiful game. I'll be honest with you, I never covered freestyle chess or chess 360, Fischer's chess, no matter how you call it. I never covered it. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. The game was great. A lot of sacrifices, a lot of great moves, a lot of positional play. And if you like the video, I would appreciate if you subscribe. Leave me a comment if you like freestyle chess more or less, or the same as regular chess. And if you would like to see more videos of this kind with freestyle chess. And thank you for watching. Good night.